Welcome to One Broken Mom, a podcast dedicated to raising awareness of mental health, parenting, and self-improvement. I am the host, Ameé Coney. One Broken Mom is not a family show. It is meant for adults and contains sometimes adult language. The topics I cover can be serious and unsettling to people. However, I do have a sense of humor laced with a little bit of a punk rock attitude. So if you're interested in real talks about real stuff by real people so that we can all get better together, well, then you're in the right place, and so welcome. All right, everybody, welcome back to One Broken Mom. I have a guest on, and to be honest with you, I don't even remember how we've gotten connected, but somehow started following each other's Instagram accounts. I think probably when you throw out like terms like mental health and mental health awareness and stuff like that, lots of cool people end up in your news feed. And so he's on today, and I have to say, because, first of all, if you go to one of his posts, some of his posts are hilarious because he's got quite the sense of humor. So that's always capturing and captivating. But he actually had an Instagram video that he posted a few weeks ago talking about veterans and suicide awareness. And I watched the video. It's strong, it's powerful, it's compelling. It's not funny because the topic is not funny at all. And I asked him to be on today because this episode is publishing in September of 2020, and September is Suicide Awareness Prevention Month, Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. I think it gets wrapped up in a lot of different hashtags, but the point is that we all emphasize, raising this awareness level of suicide and how prevalent it is in the United States and worldwide. And he is a veteran who's going to talk specifically about that aspect of it, which I have not covered yet on the show. And so I want to welcome you, Jonah, to One Broken Mom this afternoon, whenever.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Sure.
It's a pleasure and honor to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Hopefully you weren't too skeptical when I first reached out to you about why I was asking you to do the show with me. Like I said, I'm used to having coaches and therapists and authors and stuff like that, but I do reach out because I think that other people's experiences and stories, they're all, invaluable. And sometimes when the experts come on the show, they're cool to learn from, but sometimes they seem like they're a little unrelatable for everybody else. And sure. I do get messages from lots of people, that are listening to the program. And some of them are actually military, either active military or veterans or, family members of it. And so this is the first time that, like I said, I have tackled the topic specifically here. And so you're not a coach, right? You don't have some cool self-help program yet available for anybody?
I've coached Little League and youth football. Does that count?
Yeah, it's close.
No, I'm not like a certified life coach or anything like that. No, or I wouldn't necessarily even call myself an expert in anything. But like you said, I am a veteran. I'm retired Army. I was medically retired from the Army after a little over 10 years. I am a parent as well, which is one reason why your podcast name caught my attention. We're all broken parents inside, right? We're broken kids that grow up to be broken parents that have kids ourselves. So yeah, I'm not really sure how we came across that, but it's interesting that we connected. And in my video, you had mentioned that it wasn't very funny. And I find that comment especially humorous because the veteran community, specifically the veteran community around me that's had a lot of struggles with the mental health and the different aspects, they find that video hilarious. Specifically one part where I asked a friend of mine, Adam Schumann, who was the inspiration for a movie called Thank You for Your Service. His part in the movie, he kind of mocks the challenge in kind of a funny way. So, but we wanted to get what our community is feeling about the challenge, because right. there's a lot of people outside of that community thinking they're helping, and the community, the veterans who have been suicidal or who have had the extreme mental health problems, we don't like those videos. and I say we, I surveyed as many of my combat veteran friends or veteran friends that I knew regarding this video before I made it. So am I in the wrong here? I was asking them, do we all feel like this? And I honestly couldn't tell you one person who said, no, we don't feel like that. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of where the video came from. And I just got a bunch of cool software for my comedy stuff. So I was like, I'm going to try and make a video, figure out this Adobe Premiere thing. So that's kind of how it came to be.
Yeah, it's a really well done, and it's great. And I will have a link to your Instagram account in the podcast notes for everybody to kind of jump in so they get a chance to be able to watch that. And it, I also, part of my day job, we were talking a little bit about our day jobs outside of this. I wish that I was a professional podcaster. It'd be amazing if I could do this all the time, but I can't. I've got my own bills to pay, and I work in the field of healthcare workers. And there is in these kind of like high conflict, intense fields, there does appear to be this almost an impenetrable bubble, like the camaraderie and the understanding that builds up because of the type of person who goes into this field and works on it on a day-to-day basis. That, I feel like sometimes a naturalist because this is a nursing agency and I don't have nursing experience. So I'm in there for my business acumen, not necessarily because I understand what it means to be a nurse. And I can imagine that's the same way with the military. My biological dad was in the Air Force, but that's a blip on my radar because and my stepdad was in the Army, but their service records are so far behind him in my past. I can't say that they had a huge influence on me or given me a depth of understanding of the military. But if I were to compare what I see in the nursing field, there's a lot of people don't understand, right? So you've got people on the outside trying to tell people on the inside what they should or shouldn't be doing with their lives, or how they should or shouldn't be treating themselves, or all of that. And I can imagine then it's frustrating, to have a bunch of people that don't have your experience, deciding for you what's the best route forward, for whatever it is or whatever challenge that you might have.
Yep.
Now, how did you, why did you decide to enlist? Let's start there with your military career.
Back up to 18 years old. I knew I was going to be in the military. My grandfather was a fighter pilot in the Air Force. And I remember specifically one picture of him in his uniform, black and white photo. So pretty old. And his family were on the porch, and it was just like the pride that was coming from my grandfather in that picture. I knew from a young age, I was like, whatever that is, I want that. and then some years later in my preteens, I got to experience the banter that the military has. My grandfather being Air Force and his brother being Navy would just go back and forth with crude comment. They didn't care who was around. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So, I joined the Air Force right away after high school, got in a little bit of trouble before I was able to leave for boot camp. And the Air Force said that I couldn't do that. I couldn't join their service anymore. Fast forward to getting off probation a couple of years later, and the Army recruiter was right there to welcome me with open arms, which I look back now, and it's definitely a blessing because I don't think the Air Force would have provided for me what the Army did. Mm-hmm. So it worked out.
Now, did I see that you are a former medic?
Yep. Yeah. I was a medic. And then at some point in my career, I transitioned towards physical therapy assistant for a little while, mm-hmm. but I was in the medical field for all 10 plus years. Yep. Okay.
Now, we're talking about mental health, and you're pretty honest with sharing that your own, kind of battles, wars, and constant growth that you're dealing with is PTSD and anxiety. Were these things that you felt like you were carrying with you into the military that you didn't know were already in your backpack? Or did you end up having some experiences while serving that actually, kind of set you into this world of, suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts? And I think you even put in drinking and stuff like that. I mean, all the kind of negative, behaviors that some of us pick up when we're, kind of dealing.
That's a challenging question to answer. In my opinion, I think we are the outcome of our experiences type of deal, right? So if I was to say that I didn't have some inclination of trauma before I joined the military, I would definitely be lying. I had a biological dad who was a monster, you name it, that type of deal. But I definitely think the things that I experienced in my military career, not just from deployment, but I had some other incidences, they compound upon each other. And you had kind of mentioned it before we started recording, excuse me, about how how it's kind of a compound of life experiences that leads up to an explosion. And I use the analogy of picture like a big Roman Colosseum or something in its heyday. It's beautiful. There's columns all around it, hundreds of them. Well, over time, those columns, those support systems, excuse me, they start to wear and tear. They start to crack, natural erosion, then war. So you get a whole side of that Colosseum taken out. And now the physics of what held that building up aren't in place anymore. And that's what I equate my experience to. My Colosseum was a little damaged and then had some heavy hitters to where it got to the point where the Colosseum was not going to make it much longer. Mm-hmm. So I think it really is, it's a combination of a lot of things, but then we have to talk about what about the men and women that I served right next to that had the exact same experiences as me during that year. And they had no problems when they came home. Like, what are the underlying factors, the common denominators that were different for us that came out to a different solution?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, which is really, I think the military has spent some time actually looking into that, like with resilience training, and understanding. I know that I think the kind of not paying enough attention to what happens coming in before a military career starts is where people are starting to go. I mean, we can't underestimate tough life experiences. Like, we all handle them differently. We all, depending on our support systems, and what that architecture look like. And that's a great analogy of using it, because that's actually a term that's used quite often in, neuroscience development, is that it's brain architecture. And you either have strong supports in some areas or you have weak supports in other areas. When you are looking at your military experience, did you start to feel a little bit of that collapse happening, or was it after you actually retired and stepped away from it that that things got worse or different, or whatever?
My collapse started actually very early in my career, before I even deployed. About less than a year after I had joined, my ex-wife now and I found her friend and her husband in a murder-suicide. We were not ready for it. We were not prepared. We were actually supposed to have Sunday Easter dinner at their house, and we found them Sunday. So I was kind of rattled before I ever went overseas. That shot was a real big one to my columns. That's when I started self-medicating quite a bit. The things that I would see when I closed my eyes, it was like I was back in that house every day, and so that was a really big hit. And then shortly after, we found out that we were pregnant with our now only son. And I got a mental pause from that, because at that point there was something to look forward to. There was something positive coming into our lives. And then, so I actually kind of rebounded pretty quick, didn't drink as much when my son came around, and then deployed. And then when it was coming home from the deployment was tough, because there was a lot of reintegrating back into a family life that a lot of people, I don't think they think of. So for example, my ex-wife was a single parent for a year, meaning she was responsible for the bathing, the clothing, the day-to-day operations of the household. And so now I come in and I want to help, I want to do things, but she's already got this system that she's perfected. And now there's this outside influence and it's throwing chaos. So while we look forward to coming home as much, just coming back creates an immense amount of chaos. Mm-hmm. And it just kept rolling after that. Divorce. And then I got in a lot of sticky situations towards the end of my career that led to my medical retirement. The Army basically said, your mental health is not good. We could not send you back to war, which they were absolutely right, to include, suicidal ideations, slamming my car into a wall at 60 miles an hour, all kinds of craziness happening in a short period of time. But it really bubbled after I got out, because I was removed from the last support I had at the time, what I thought was my military career. Everything else, all my sports have already gone. I get my son every other weekend, not very satisfying. I don't have a wife, you know. So when the military handed me the medical retirement, that was the blow that just spiraled downhill, and ended up getting arrested, losing my son, nearly overdosing, all kinds of stuff. It was one big thing after the other within maybe 3 years. And it got to the point where it's just too much.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I think that's where we all come, right? Whether it was military or civilian or what have you, it's the point of too much.
mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I'm not sure anybody can prepare. Like, I don't believe that's in the checklist of life to prepare for finding a friend, and, two friends murdered and, death by suicide. I don't, I can't even imagine that being something that anybody would have to deal with. And it's really, I'm sorry, God, that's just can imagine. I wouldn't know what to do with myself there. So I think that's
I didn't.
Yeah,
No,
well, you
right.
said you weren't prepared for it. Again, I don't remember that being in the checklist of adult life. That's the thing that we skip out over, right?
Right, 20
Yeah.
years old.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Had you had suicidal thoughts before your military? Before you got into that? I'm curious because sometimes people that I've talked to on the show, it's been a persistent part of their life since they were 8, and then, and then for some people it is the sum of many things where I thought I was really digging life. And then now I'm just fuck this. No, I can't, why?
Yeah. I don't think I struggled with suicidal ideations. I definitely think that I had some confusion growing up about the world around me that led to a lot of anxiety, some attention-seeking behavior, but I wouldn't put it to the point of suicidal or suicidal ideations. That came much later. The first time was 2000, I don't know, 14 or 15, and that led to me being hospitalized, and which eventually led to my military retirement. It was kind of later after a lot of those columns had fallen, because I've always been tough, right? Or the guy that can always, I was the first one on top of the mountain, or I was the whatever cocky bullshit you want to put out there. But so it took a lot for me to let it be known that my Coliseum was falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Oh, go ahead. Well, I was going to ask you, is that an unusual story? A bunch of tough guys in the military. I'm going to look at this from the outside looking in, right? When we look at our American military system and the people that are in it, there's an expectation that, obviously you volunteered to go die for our country, so you must be the toughest of the tough. And if you demonstrate anything other than that, then obviously you are unfit to be in it. That's just kind of the mythology that we have around it. Does that make it easy for any of you that need it to actually ask for help when you do?
That's a good question, and I think it really has to be broken up into a couple different segments. So once you're in the military, and I've been out for a couple of years now, 2016 I retired, but there is definitely the tough guy mentality, right? I used to joke around that the military is full of all the jocks who couldn't make it in college, and depending on what your job is, there's definitely some of that alpha male or alpha female type of mentality. I never took that stance, in the sense, I think partially because I was medical, but I knew when we found our friends in 2007 that my life had forever been changed. And if I didn't do something, I was going to be a wreck. So the first thing I did was I walked into my boss's office Monday morning. I was like, we got to talk. What do I do? Whatever the repercussions were at that point, I didn't care, because I was in such dire need. And that's kind of what got me back to getting help again 10 years later. Yeah, I have to be in such dire need that any stigmas around what mental health might be, I don't care, because it's life or death. Mm-hmm. But so fast forward to veterans, I think that's changing. I think the veteran community, especially my generation of veterans, we're talking out more. We're a lot of us are coming to the other side of those troubles. And now we're like, hey, young bucks coming out, listen up, this is not the way to do things. Do it, but whatever you have to do. So I do take part in a couple of veteran nonprofits that do different outings for veterans, and we're trying to mentor each other as well as the next generation of the veterans that come out. Because I'm tougher than half of them, and I go get help. So tell me I'm wrong. That's what kind of the deal we take now.
Well, that's I have wondered, and I've had this conversation with another friend of mine who is involved in the military, and I asked, and maybe you know a little bit about this, but what happens the first day somebody enlists? Is there any changes in the military that you may or may not, maybe it's happening, maybe it's not, and should it? If we don't really know how the past experiences may get compounded once we start a career, it's like, to me, it's like a preemptive strike of really kind of setting the ground and the foundation with somebody coming in of like, hey, let's see where you're going. Let's see what we're working with here as we develop your military career and make sure that, the whole system doesn't collapse under the weight of everything. Because what you're exposed to in the military is above and beyond your Amazon job, or anything else that you've got going on. And to me, it feels like we have to, we should. And again, I'm going to say I'm on the bubble looking in, telling the military how or what they should do with their own industry. And I don't know that. So, take it for, for what it's worth. But being somebody that's been in it, do you think that there's any merit to that? Or is that the wrong approach to take with new people coming in and saying right from day one, let's make sure you're strong and ready to go, and do it in a way that doesn't feel like they're being judged or shamed or anything like that?
I don't know if it's feasible. Unless we come up with some kind of, and I've kind of joked about this a lot, we need some type of objective scanning where they can just plug my brain in and be like, no, this kid's had too much, send him down to the Coast Guard or whatever. But I don't think that exists. And then we run the risk of, kids, I have a lot of friends who came from troubled childhoods, joined the military and flourished. Would we then want to run the risk of maybe never allowing that to happen? So I mean, I would love for that to be a thing. Realistically, I feel like it's the military's job to do a better job noticing, identifying, and dealing with the issue at hand, right when it happens, before they get out, before they're veterans, before they go on the next deployment. But the military, it's federal government. They do a lot of good things on paper, but when it comes down to getting that down to the lowest level, down to the line units, to the everyday soldiers, it doesn't happen. I mean, there's policy after policy. They make us go to classes. They make us take classes when we're exiting the military. But there's such a bridge from the efforts the Department of Defense is making to what's actually taking place, at least while I was in. It's kind of just check this box, do this PowerPoint, but we don't really give a shit.
The bureaucracy, right? The thing that we don't like about that. Well, it's a daunting topic, but yet it's, to me, it's that you and I are having a conversation because we're talking about saving lives, right? And, there's a lot of industries changing in the last few years that are talking about trauma-informed care, trauma-informed schools, trauma-informed parenting. It seems like as we're talking here about military veterans killing themselves, then a trauma-informed military would not be a terrible thing to consider. It seems like too, though, philosophically speaking, I feel like we have to have beer. Like this is the conversation you have at a bar when, you can say whatever you want, but, how do you treat trauma at the same time and maintain a level that allows you to be willing to, again, do what you have to do, which is at the most extreme case, go out and die for your country. Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's tough.
I think that the final solution to that is processing time. And I don't know if the military has gotten better with that. For example, coming back, it's just, in the military is very forward moving mentality. Everything's what's happening next, where are we going, what's the mission. There's very little pause. What just happened? Holy shit. Maybe we need to take a breather. There's very little of that. And so, and I think that adds to the Coliseum effect, because I never stopped and fixed that one pillar because I couldn't. I had the next mission. I had the next whatever. And I think that's one big problem in society as a whole. But when we talk about trauma, I look at it from the stances, while I was in the military, and some of my trauma comes from that, you as a non-veteran could have experienced a very high amount of trauma. There is no difference past the experience, right? And what I mean by that is what trauma does to our brains with the flooding of I'm having a brain fart with the happens a lot. A couple brain injuries too. But when it floods our brain with all these different emotions and chemicals, and then there's an actual damage to the brain, like PTSD, right? There's a physical damage to portions of the brain. And then we can get away from the idea of your trauma. And maybe I'm speaking from the veteran experience, but there's a lot of comparing trauma in my community, right? Mm-hmm. Well, my trauma was this, your trauma was only that. When we break it down to a biological or physiological level, our brains don't know the difference. Mm-hmm. Brain says, holy shit, something happened. Now it's weird. And that's mm-hmm. across the board, whether you're a victim of sexual assault or assault or police brutality, whatever the trauma is, we're all on the same playing field. Mm-hmm. So whatever we can, I read the book Tribe by Sebastian, I want to say his name's Younger. Have you ever heard of that book, Tribe?
No.
I highly recommend it when it comes to mental health. But he takes an approach from the military of countries that have a mandatory civil service have some of the lowest suicide rates in the world. And he was kind of breaking down why that happens. Well, if you come back from an experience and everyone around you has already experienced that, you're not an outcast. You're not on the outskirts. They know how to deal with these, like, hey, come here, young buck, like this is the way we're going to do it. And we lack that in our country big time.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That wasn't anything that I was actually aware of. It makes sense though, right? Because we're all in this together, right? There is no them and us because of our voluntary system, for the military. That's fascinating. That's an interesting book too. So I'm going to look that one up
it's a very easy read too.
Okay, cool. So then what prompted you to just go ahead and do this video? Aside from the fact that you had some recording equipment and thought, why not?
Well, I started to speak out about kind of my experience through Instagram and social media in 2017, early 2018, after I'd almost died due to my addiction. And the reason why I started talking out about it is because a childhood friend had OD'd a couple months after I did and died. And very few of us, we knew he was having some issues because of stuff that he had posted online, but it wasn't anything out of the norm. And then he's dead. And I was like, well, shit. 3 months ago, I was right there on that doorstep and I didn't tell anybody. I think like 5 people knew that I almost died. And so I took that really personal. If I would have been more vocal about my experience, maybe Adam would still be here. Maybe he would have called me. Maybe he would have called someone else. And so that's when I started getting vocal about my experience, which fast forward to the video is the idea that doing a challenge to save someone's life, coming from someone who's been on the edge of suicide, the last thing on my mind was, did Steve do his fucking push-ups today? I'm sorry, like, it's just not there. And it's so disconnected and so disingenuous from the mission statement of the challenge that it's insulting to me. I hate it. It boils my blood. And when I see other veterans doing it, which kind of prompted the video, I was tagged by another veteran. And it just boils my blood because it's, in my opinion, it's a me thing, right? Because, and I think the majority of those 22 push-up challenges that I see, they put the suicide awareness number or hotline. Have you ever called those? Any of them? I have.
Oh, I haven't. The hotlines? The hotlines are?
Yeah. Listen, if I don't want to call someone that's very close to me that knows me intimately and tell them that I'm struggling, me personally, I'm not going to call a complete stranger who probably hasn't had the life experiences that I have and just blurt out everything to them. Mm-hmm. My problem's never been talking about it. I could tell you about it. It's what happens after that that's been kind of the issue. So it took me a long time to make that video, weeks, because I didn't want to offend anyone, in the sense that some people, I actually called a civilian friend of mine who did this challenge, and I said, what does this challenge mean to you before I tell you what it means to me? And her answer was genuine. I mean, she wants to do something for the veteran community. The problem is the veteran community isn't telling the civilian community what we need done. Mm-hmm. And so the civilian community just comes up with ideas. But it's not working, because suicide rates, and like I said in the video, amongst women veterans is growing rapidly. So we got to do something different.
Well, so then this is your platform, Jonah. That's what we're here to talk about then today, is what do we need to do as the outsider looking in, as the person of good intentions, of wanting to save lives, of not understanding what would need to be done differently to support the veteran community, because there is suicide's complex for everybody. But again, as we've talked about, if you already come into a high conflict, high stress, life-threatening do or die type of a career, on top of, some of the things that many of us have experienced in the course of our lives, there is a different sense of urgency, not more urgent, less urgent or whatever, but it's different for this. So where do you think we have to go? The average person who, can't do 22 push-ups, and doesn't want to virtue signal, that they're supporting it this week or, whatnot. I mean, what's substantial? What is substantial things for us?
I think the biggest thing is get a veteran connected, right? There's a VA study that's published every year based on suicide rates, and kind of breaks down who are the veterans that are killing themselves. Are they the ones that have seen combat? Are they not? Are they the ones that are integrated into the VA healthcare system, or have they never been in the system? Those kind of things kind of point some light to what's happening. And those that are in the system tend to commit suicide less. And then I think that starts with the veteran service officers, the easiest way to start. And I put that in the video. There's veteran service officers across this entire country. Here in Minnesota, they have county veteran service officers, they have state veteran service officers, VA service officers, and they're kind of like a one-stop shop for veteran things. So if a veteran just knows who that person is, then when things get rough, when we lose our jobs, when we lose our homes, when we lose the things around us, we know who to start with, at least. Mm-hmm. And I think that's super important. And the other thing is we have to build communities. I started with the idea that we have to build communities around veterans, right? Because a veteran that has purpose, that has gainful employment, that has housing, that has gainful relationships, they're probably not going to kill themselves. So build a community around a veteran. But recently in 2020, we need to build a community around everyone. I don't know if you watch the news, but Minnesota's a little wilding out right now. Yeah. It's just the community. We have so much more in common than we have differences. And once we get around that, and the veteran community is interesting because I come across a lot of veterans who have the "what did you do" mentality, or towards civilians. And I shouldn't, how do I put this?
It's an adult show. Just go ahead and say whatever you want to say.
There are some veterans who have no problem furthering the gap between the veteran and civilian community, because the civilian community can't understand, or they don't know, or they don't whatever. And it is my attempt to bring that gap shorter and shorter, because we are the civilian community. We're all Americans. We just had a really, really weird job for a while, but that's not who we are today. And that we're still in these cities, in these counties, sending our kids to these schools. We have to break that. Mm-hmm.
So I'll put a link for how somebody could find their veteran support officer, like in their area. There is a like a place. Here I am, the non-vet, asking the dumb question. There's a place where I can find that information, that I can share it with somebody.
That's the tricky part. So there is something called a county veteran service officer, or an organization that kind of accumulates them all, but not all 50 states have them.
Oh,
So what I recommend is telling people just to literally Google those 3 words, Veteran Service Officer, and Google will pull up whatever organization is around you. The VFW or the American Legion, if you're looking for a specific organization, they'll have links.
okay.
But
And is there, are these officers ready to support somebody who's having suicidal thoughts?
good question. I don't think that it would be like going to your county register and telling them that you have suicidal thoughts. Probably not the best idea. They're administrative type folks. These are not VA or mental health folks. If that is the case, they'll know emergency contacts to call, or they should. So who do contact when we're in an emergency situation? Then would be the thing, right? I get that's the people around you. Comes all back to community. I'm not going to call the veteran service officer and tell him to come to my house and talk me down off the ledge.
Do you think, and I mean, you can't speak for everybody, so maybe you can just speak for yourself, but is there a, is there a stronger code of silence about letting out, someone's pain and suffering when they've been in the military? I mean, imagine there's actually a lot of people that feel that, but I'm just curious, if we know military veterans, again, I feel like a naturalist in the world here, but, asking somebody to reach out to you when they have such a strong inclination to not say anything can be challenging, right? Like, I think we all intend to do that. A lot of us actually say, like, please let me know you're having a problem. But when you speak with military veterans, are they less inclined to even accept that openness and helpfulness from people that maybe aren't, in the military?
Sure. I think veterans, like most of the population, is we're going to reach out to someone who has the closest known experience. So if I'm having a specific issue with, let's say, the nightmares or the anxiety, something very specific to my combat experience, my general inclination is to reach out to someone who's had something similar, because they're like, oh, you're being dumb, or yep, I remember that just happened last week. You'll be fine. Stop being a pussy, or whatever. We use very vulgar language and terms, but really that when my platoon sergeant says that to me, that's, hey man, you're going to be all right. Like, I'm here, So I can see why from the outside that statement might look at as like shaming getting help, but it's not. So I think that kind of goes along with like, if I have a issue, like my car breaks down and it just throws me into a whirlwind, I don't know how I'm going to fix it, I'm probably not going to call a veteran friend. It's not relatable. It's not applicable. So whoever's closest to that issue or concern for whatever reason is who I think they're going to reach out to. Trying to force, like, my civilian friends, make sure you call me if you're having PTSD troubles. And they're like, what the fuck is this guy? He's a weirdo. I think we just have to know who we know has our back. I mean, my anxiety comes heavily from PTSD, but I have extreme anxiety about parenting. That has nothing to do with combat. If I call one of my veteran friends with no kids, he's going to be like, well, I don't know what to tell you. So I might reach out to, a friend who's a civilian but has kids and be like, they're all right. They'll make it to school. You'll be fine, or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And so what's cropping up into my head is, the organizations that may be out there that are specifically for veteran support in the areas of suicide awareness and prevention. Are there any that you've had some experience with or anything like that? Because I'll find them. Like, I'm the researcher nerd. So once we're done here, I'll look them all up and I'll attach them to the podcast. Sure.
There's a lot of things for veterans to get connected within the veteran community and these different organizations. Here in Minnesota, the DAV, which I believe stands for the Disabled American Veterans. I probably messed that up. They do free hunting trips. The nearest base up here in Minnesota that I've done a couple times. I just got back from a golfing trip that was all veterans, or mostly veterans. So there's a lot of things like that for us to get involved with. People don't hear about them. there's a disconnect between the organizations that are trying to engulf as many veterans as they can and the veterans that are hearing about them. So really, they're in every county in every state, there's things for the veterans of all experiences and all careers to take part in. It's
Well,
just a matter of finding it. But the VFW and the American Legion and the DAV are some of the biggest ones.
okay. All right. And I'll find some links to include in there, because if what you're saying is one of the most important things is to get a vet connected and kind of in a community, whatever that community is and whatever, feels the most authentic to who they are, right? Being able to find them in there, then it probably enhances and builds the opportunity that they'll have somebody that has some other shared experiences with them, which is really ultimately, it's the kind of overcoming the feeling that you're alone and unsupported,
And that's not just a veteran thing, right? We're all the same.
Yeah. We're all humans. It's weird.
We don't like feeling alone.
Right.
It's not good. And in 2020, it's September 18th. I think a lot of us are feeling alone with the weird stuff that's happening and being isolated in our homes. And so we need to continue to build those communities and connections. And that's how we're going to make it through this. Politicians are going to help us with suicide and all these other issues.
Yeah.
Pen to paper doesn't do much.
No, not really. The bureaucracy and the checklists. No, definitely not.
We talked about community. I think the only other important thing to mention with veteran suicide specifically is the lack of purpose. Was the only thing I missed from my notes. We come from a community where walking down the street in your work uniform, because that's essentially what our camos are, right? People stop and they look at you different. There's a little sense of national pride in the sense like there's one of ours, or that, and we're a part of something bigger. We have plans and goals and things. And then when we take that uniform off and we walk down the street in our new work uniform, we're just the guy with long hair and the beard. And there's a lot of veterans that get out, regardless of whether they ever deployed, who feel like they don't have a sense of purpose anymore. And we need to find veterans' purpose on the smallest level. Because I think veterans have this grandeur idea, right? Like someone who's coming out of a suicidal situation that they have to change the world. But what about what's going on at home? Have that veteran change the world at home, figure out how to parent better, how to be a better spouse, how to increase their income, do whatever. And then once that's mastered-ish, then work your way out, right? What's your neighbor doing? What's your community doing? And that type of idea. So I'm going to change the world in the fact that my son's never going to shoot up a school. I know that, right? Because I'm taking the extra time and attention to make sure that my son's not only a productive part of society, but it actually contributes more than your average person. And that's me changing the world. That's my purpose now, to where I don't have to end terrorism. I don't have to save the world from Osama bin Laden types. I still have a purpose, and it's here at home. I think that's a very important thing for a lot of us to think of. We have purpose outside of a job or a title or what have you.
That's actually, to be honest with you, that is not a thought that even ever occurred to me, in the sense of that as you're talking through it, it's like, yeah, we see the, everybody loves to share the video of the first class person giving up their seat for a military vet coming in, or a service member that's going home, or, all this stuff. And I can imagine when you have that sense of pride of being associated with something, because I don't know about your age, but I remember back in the 80s when we were still talking about like the mistreatment of veterans coming home from Vietnam, and vastly different, and how we could not do that again to our military. We couldn't ostracize them, we couldn't blame them, we couldn't hate them, for, being involved in, some foreign conflict. And so the direction shift, like the winds changed to making sure that we showed all this appreciation. But you're right, when the uniform's gone, you don't look like you're in that, you're in that job anymore. You look like the rest of us, right? And if you're if you don't know what's next, I mean, all of us, I mean, kind of can feel that way, right? If there are people that still struggle with like, I just don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And it bothers me that I haven't connected, you know, I want to connect with something, but I don't know what that bigger meaning is or that bigger idea is. But coming from a military perspective of, you know, when I'm wearing the uniform, people look at me differently. And then when I take it off, nobody looks at me at all, can be a jarring, I would imagine, for some, not all, but for some.
How about like those welcome home videos, right? Where the soldier or service member creeps into the kid's class to surprise them coming home, right? Do
and
you
I
not
cry every time, every time.
Every time. There's a funny story behind some of those. It's a little planned, but at the same time, when I come home early from my work job or my 9 to 5 now, and I sneak into my kid's class, they're like, "What's this guy doing? This is super creepy." So it's like, yeah, the admiration that we once had for doing something noble and outside of ourselves gets stripped from us without our say, if that makes sense. And it's not like we do it for, or me, I didn't do it for the look at me,
right.
But it's noticeable, right? People are like, "Oh, I'll give you a discount on your insurance. I'll give you it's an entirely different world," and then it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, well, now where's my purpose? What am I supposed to do now? Create it. And I say that to military and civilian alike. Create your purpose. Don't wait for it to fall into your lap. Find a need and fill it. And there's your purpose.
And so that in itself could be life-saving when there's something still worth fighting for, living for, really, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I wanted to just, you know, kind of wrap it up here with you and talk a little bit. First of all, your timeline blows my mind. Yeah, I don't want to gloss over the fact that, you know, these life-changing moments have only been in just the last couple of years. And I just want to commend you for just kind of like igniting that energy and turning it around, you know, as fast as you did. To be honest with you, to hear that you were just discharged just a few years ago and you're already kind of on there, like that's momentous right there. And if you haven't been congratulated for doing that, like I'm telling you right now, like good for you for doing that. Because sometimes people, it takes some time and it's no judgment against them. But when somebody can just like step into that and just go with it and run with it, like that's pretty powerful. And I'm sure it's been meaningful for a lot of people that you've run across, that you have done that. And hopefully it inspires other people to realize that, you know, healing and surviving and moving on isn't something that is unattainable or something that needs to take a long time. If it does for you, it does. But it also can be something that can be, I mean, this feels really spontaneous. Like this feels fast to see 2-3 years, you know, 4 years from nearly dying to, you know, now being an advocate. I mean, you look like you're doing okay. I mean, I don't want to make any assumptions because, you know, your hair's clean and you've got a sweatshirt on, but I would imagine from what I've seen that like you feel good about where you've come to at this point, right?
I do. And my mommy commends me all the time. I love my mom.
Okay, good.
I appreciate the kind words, and I think it has been motivating for some, but I got to be honest, I caught some breaks. Along the way. And part of that kind of adds into why I'm sharing what I am, because I didn't necessarily do anything to get to where I am, in the sense of, I don't know, if I put on a linear timeline, the date of me almost dying to 3 years later, which the anniversary just passed actually, I just didn't stop, right? Like I had such a dry, I had some setbacks, obviously, which I think is very important to mention. I didn't get from almost losing everything to the house and everything that I have now in 3 years without some setbacks, some hard ones too. But there were some days where my only success was just not quitting. And I had to find power in that, because I was so close to quitting so many times that today I didn't, and that was good enough. And then tomorrow I'll do something. And if I didn't get that done, I still didn't quit. And I just kind of kept that mentality with everything that I do still going forward. I'm always moving forward no matter what happens. If there's a roadblock, I'm going to kind of side hustle and go around it, because we don't have any other choice. And I have this like, this unused energy deep inside me, where my recovery and getting to where could have taken 10 years, but what else would I have done? Watch everything on Netflix? Like I can't function that way. I have to be doing something and moving forward, or in my life, I feel like I'm moving backwards, and I can't do that. So I just take the small successes as they come. Yeah. I would try and avoid grandeur thinking in the beginning. Just today, focus on today, focus literally whoever walks into your sight of vision and nothing outside that. Because that's what it takes sometimes.
No, that's great. That's good advice. I think that'll be my clip. So everybody will get to hear that one.
Perfect.
So what do? What's your day job? We talked I know a little bit about it, but let us all know, because I introduced you as like, you're a comedian, like at the front of this. And so not my usual guest. So
I am a comedian, but that does not pay the bills.
Neither does podcasting, by the way.
Yeah. I've gotten paid to do comedy, but it's kind of morphed into some other things that I'll be working on in the future to help veterans and veteran nonprofits. But I do have the good old 9 to 5. I work for the state VA in Minnesota with education benefits. So like we had kind of discussed earlier, the majority of my job revolves around helping veterans, current service members, and their family members in college. But very often I have a veteran or service member come to me and have a question about their benefit or their payment, when in reality, the root cause of their question is, I lost my job. I need to find more money, or I'm about to get kicked out, or my wife's about to leave me. And so that kind of grew my passion. I've always had a passion for the veteran community because they're my people. We're cut from the same cloth, but this really grew to finding out how I can help. And so I'm always sending veterans to somebody. Go talk to this guy. Go talk to there's always things out there. And I've started to build that into something that might morph into a business later down the road for helping veterans kind of find resources and connect them with the civilian community. Because it's not a job as much when it's my calling. It's what I was meant to do. So yeah, my day job's pretty cool. Surrounded by veterans, working with veterans. Although we're doing this at-home thing because of COVID. I think I'm running on 7 months working from home, and it's brutal.
Especially for somebody that I'm sure is naturally outgoing, right?
Oh man. Yeah, it's interesting. I have a cat for a coworker, and then my son stops by for school every once in a while, but
And you're in rural Minnesota, right? Like, I think that's what you said in the email.
Yeah, I use that term. I don't know. The people out here don't call it rural, but the town I live in has less people than the high school I went to in San Diego.
Okay, that's rural.
Yeah, it's a little small, but it's where I need to be to heal too.
Yeah,
out in nature a lot and quiet, definitely.
Yeah, cool. Well, the Boundary Waters are one of my wish list items too. A friend that I had that lives up in that area was talking about them, so I looked that up. So it's one of my things I'd like to do, is to go canoeing or kayaking up in that territory. So it's not a terrible place to have to quarantine, for a pandemic. If you like the outdoors. It's awful if you hate the outdoors.
And my little grocery store had the shelves stocked the whole time. So it's hard to complain with that too. Because I know people in California back home didn't have such luxuries.
Yeah. No,
yeah.
Cool. Well, Jonah, it's really been awesome to talk to you. And actually, I look forward to possibly having you back on in a bit when you're able to get your other program that's up and running for vets. I appreciate you sharing, your story. Not everybody has an ability or desire to be transparent about, the things that we struggle with and stuff, but it is important when we can. I believe that those of us who can do that should, because it does, like you said, it helps, let somebody else out there know that they're not alone with this. And so I think it is, lending a voice to this to this particular issue. And I appreciate the video. Like I said, I'll get a link in there so that people can actually watch that and see what you did. It is a little bit funny in it, like, making fun of it. But I think that if you're the person that's been doing the push-ups, you're just kind of like, oh, it's not what I meant. But
Right.
It raised awareness. It caught my attention, which was the point. And I think that was really powerful that you did that.
Awareness about the awareness.
Yeah, awareness about the awareness, and maybe
Good.
do something different.
I'm glad it did. Yeah, and it's changed. There's people trying different things now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad it's made that impact, and I'm going to be doing more. So people will hear from me more. We're going to be changing the world one community at a time, one veteran at a time, and their families, and it'll just grow. Mm-hmm. We have lots of positivity to spread, right?
Yep, totally. Awesome. Well, thank you. Really do appreciate meeting you and getting to know you, and you having you spend some time with me to talk about this very important thing. So.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Cool.